Elliot adjusted the strap of his camera bag as he walked down the narrow, tree-lined street of his childhood neighborhood. The houses looked smaller than he remembered, the paint on some of them peeling, the lawns less meticulously kept. It had been nearly 10 years since he'd last been here. Work had kept him busy. Photojournalism didn't leave much room for leisurely visits home. But when his sister had called, urging him to come back for their parents' anniversary party, he couldn't refuse. It was late afternoon when I arrived at the small house I once called home. The familiar creak of the gate greeted me as I stepped into the front yard. I paused, letting the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming jasmine wash over me. And then I saw him. Across the street, sitting on the porch steps of his own house, was Luke. He looked older, of course, but the years had only deepened the quiet intensity in his eyes and the slight curve of his lips. He was wearing a faded flannel shirt and jeans, his hands wrapped around a mug. When Luke looked up and our eyes met, my heart stuttered. "Elliot," Luke called, his voice carrying easily across the street. "I thought you'd never come back." I hesitated for only a moment before crossing the street. My steps felt too loud in the silence that stretched between us. When I reached the porch, Luke stood, and we faced each other for the first time in a decade. Up close, I could see the flecks of gold in Luke's hazel eyes, the faint lines etched at the corners from years of laughter or perhaps heartache. "It's been a while," I said, my voice softer than I intended. Luke's smile was small but genuine. "Yeah, too long." We ended up sitting on the porch steps, side by side. Luke handed me a mug of coffee without asking if I wanted one, and I took it, grateful for something to hold. We talked about surface-level things at first: my work, Luke's job as a carpenter, the changes in the neighborhood. But as the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting everything in hues of orange and pink, the conversation shifted. "I was sorry to hear about your dad," I said, my voice quiet. Luke nodded, staring down at his mug. "Thanks. It's been hard, but I'm managing." I wanted to reach out, to touch Luke's arm or shoulder, but I held back. "Instead," I said, "I should have called, or come back sooner." I didn't know what to say. Luke's lips twitched in a wry smile. "You always were bad at keeping in touch." I laughed softly, the sound tinged with regret. "Yeah, I guess I was." We sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the neighborhood filling the space between us. A dog barked in the distance, and the faint hum of cicadas grew louder as the evening deepened. Finally, Luke broke the quiet. "I missed you, you know." His voice was steady, but there was a vulnerability in his tone that made my chest ache. I turned to look at him, my own walls crumbling under the weight of Luke's honesty. "I missed you too." Luke's gaze met mine, and for a moment, the years between us seemed to disappear. We were just two boys again, sitting on this very porch, sharing secrets and dreams under the same sky. But we weren't boys anymore, and the unspoken feelings that had lingered between us back then were no longer something we could ignore. "Why didn't you ever come back?" Luke asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, the words caught in my throat. I was scared, I admitted finally. Scared of what it would mean, of what I'd feel if I saw you again. Luke nodded, as if he'd expected that answer. "And now?" I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. "Now I'm scared of what it means if I don't." The corners of Luke's mouth lifted in a small, bittersweet smile. "Elliot," he said, his voice filled with something I couldn't quite name. "We've both been scared for too long." Before I could respond, Luke reached out, his hand brushing against mine. It was a small gesture, tentative and careful, but it sent a jolt through my entire being. I turned my hand over, letting Luke's fingers slide into mine. The contact was warm and grounding, and I felt something inside me shift. We sat there until the stars appeared, our hands intertwined, the silence between us no longer heavy but comforting. We didn't need to say anything more that night. The unspoken understanding between us was enough. In the days that followed, I found myself drawn back to Luke's house more often than not. We fell into an easy rhythm, our connection deepening with every shared meal, every quiet conversation, every stolen glance. Luke showed me the workshop in his garage, the scent of sawdust and varnish filling the air as he explained his latest projects. I, in turn, shared my photographs, the stories behind each one bringing a spark of wonder to Luke's eyes. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching a summer storm roll in, I turned to Luke, my heart full. "I'm sorry for staying away so long," I said, my voice thick with emotion. Luke reached out, his hand resting on my knee. "You're here now. That's what matters." I covered Luke's hand with my own, our fingers tangling together. The rain began to fall, soft and steady, and we stayed there, wrapped in the quiet intimacy of the moment. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Later that night, as the rain continued to patter softly against the roof, Luke invited me inside. The house was warm and inviting, filled with the subtle scent of cedarwood. We sat on the couch, our conversation quieter now, filled with shared glances and the occasional brush of hands. The world outside seemed to fade, leaving just the two of us in this cocoon of unspoken affection. At one point, Luke turned to me, his eyes searching mine. "Elliot," he said softly, "can I ask you something?" I nodded, my heart pounding. "Anything. Do you regret coming back?" His voice was steady, but I could hear the vulnerability beneath it. I shook my head, reaching out to gently cup his face. "No," I said, my voice firm. "I regret not coming back sooner." Luke's expression softened, and for a moment, we simply looked at each other. Then, slowly, he leaned in, and I met him halfway. The kiss was soft and tentative at first, but it deepened as years of longing and unspoken words poured out between us. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a promise, a silent vow to never let fear keep us apart again. When we finally pulled away, Luke rested his forehead against mine, his breath warm against my skin. "Stay," he whispered. I nodded, my own voice caught in my throat. "I'm not going anywhere." The rest of the night was spent in quiet intimacy, wrapped in each other's arms. We talked about everything and nothing, our words mingling with the soft hum of the rain. There were no grand declarations or dramatic gestures, just the steady rhythm of two hearts finding their way back to each other. Do you have a similar story? Have you ever reconnected with someone from your past and found something unexpected? What would you do if given a second chance with someone who once meant everything to you? Share your story in the comments below.